So hello, I'm not Arne, he's not Stefan.
That's a deal.
During the rest of the keynote, we hope to not confuse you anymore. So when we planned for that keynote, we felt maybe IPC in Berlin would be the perfect place for that title slide. But then it feels a little safer to show that in Munich. So how hard can it be?
Well, we don't really know, but at least we have containers, so that probably helps.
Maybe they introduced too many containers or not enough containers, and that's the reason why the whole thing... Okay, we're not going to talk about that airport. And we have not been involved in that creation of that airport, luckily. Our history goes back to 2009. That's the year when our company was founded, and you're actually looking at 2/3 of the company. The third partner in crime is Sebastian Bergmann. You may have heard of him. And we at some point figured that it might be a good idea to create a consulting company focusing on the PHP technology stack together.
Which is really interesting because when we decided that this is maybe a good idea, and we at some point in 2009 announced the very fact, people were coming back to us and said like, well, that took us, quite some time to actually do that. We're like, really? We thought it was like a genius idea. And no, it was actually rather obvious.
So the thing is, all of us had already been active in the PHP space. We had spoken at conferences, we had published books and stuff and written blogs and all these kind of things. And we had initial customer relations or potential customer relations. So actually, at the time, I think everybody put in like 500 euros into the company, and that's where we started off growing it to what it has become today, where we get to travel quite a bit and work with really interesting companies. So going back to 2009, before we show you a screenshot of our very first website, I would like to quote Reid Hoffman. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you have launched too late. Okay?
Well, it's arguable that our website is a product, but still...
Yeah. So this is what you get when Arne sits on your couch and builds a website within 1 hour. I think that's pretty much the time it took you.
Yeah. And it wasn't pretty back then, and I don't think it became any prettier since then, but at least we were online.
Yes. And we soon ran into our very, very first big business problem.
Oh, yeah. Turns out if you do some work, at some point you want to get money for that, so customers don't pay you if you don't send them an invoice.
How do you create invoices? Well, we're just a small company. No need for any fancy stuff. No need for any cloud-based hosting, because we really don't want to put our data in the cloud and not our clients' data. So yeah, let's go for something self-hosted. I mean, we run our own server, so why should we be able to create invoices on our own? Phase 1. Well, I think we did what pretty much everybody did. We were using Office software to write invoices. Who started their company doing exactly that? Okay, who's still doing that?
Well, some people still manage.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay. So, back in the time, actually it was a legal requirement in Germany to send a printed invoice by mail, which is exactly what we did. Today we have, I think, 1 client left, and they insist on receiving a printed invoice, which really sucks because they are pretty much the only reason why we still have printed business paper stuff in stock. All the others just get PDF these days. Back in the time, yeah, we still mailed it out and soon ran into our next big business problem.
Well, maybe we should explain a little bit how we actually work.
Yeah, a good idea.
That since we are the 3 of us, and obviously we like to be at the same client at the same point in time, that's not very likely to happen all the time. And being a small company, we decided not to have a general income and whoever works makes the money and everybody else just gets it. No, it's based on the idea that if you work, you get some money. So we have to distribute it at some point. Hopefully, if the client paid, then you can actually get whatever you charged the client, basically just having the company as a wrapper around it.
So we figured that to make a living, It's not. It does not. It's not enough to send invoices and write invoices, but you also have to figure out how to distribute the money internally. So you probably need to keep some track. That kind of was our first fail in realizing, well, just writing invoices as Office documents doesn't really work out.
So yeah, let's enter phase 2, realizing we need more. So just getting money on an account and then not knowing who's actually, whatever share of that money is owned by whom. So we needed something to verify that. And of course, since we started with Office software, what's the perfect answer for Office?
Yeah, let's create spreadsheets. Those are not the real ones that we used. That's just stuff that we stole off the internet. Don't worry. Yeah, that worked great.
For a while.
Well, a pretty short while though. Yeah, it kind of allowed us to keep in track who performed what work at which client. It also helped at some point to have the shared calendar and actually put like the client appointments into the calendar. So if you go back to the calendar, you figure out, oh, I've been with that client on that day. Maybe we should invoice them.
That would help.
I think one of your Christmas presents a couple of years ago, when we went through everything, you like found, oh, we haven't built that client. Nice. I did a few days of work, and so that makes a nice Christmas present for me. Yeah. But then we are being developers, and this is the big problem you run into. Spreadsheets do not scale. Right? We're using Git, so basically everybody has a local copy of the spreadsheet, and I'm a lazy guy traveling a lot, and where I live, the internet connectivity is really crappy.
At least it used to be?
Yes. They claim that it has improved, but it kind of hasn't. Anyway, so I make that local change, and I'm trying to push the change, and Git tells me, because Arne or Sebastian has changed the file. And
we are trying to be nice and help you. Like, okay, customer paid, so we modified the flags in the spreadsheet that the invoice has been paid for.
So it actually, you end up in a merge conflict that you cannot resolve because it's a binary file. Hey, we are developers, that's stupid. And then we have so much redundancy in data, right? We're entering the same data again in the spreadsheet that has already been part of the invoice, which at the time we would still create using Office software.
Maybe we outgrew that solution relatively quickly, so that's not it either.
And it's actually pretty tough to recognize. Even with 3 persons, you're outgrowing that simple solution. If you have 300, it's definitely not going to work ever.
I would assume so.
Okay.
Yeah. So
phase 3.
To phase 3, indeed. So let's try to eliminate redundancy. That means that us being developers, let's write software. I mean, how hard can it be to write a simple piece of software to manage all that?
So that actually was back in 2012 and 2013. I was heavily into researching and studying domain-driven development back then, and figured, well, I'm a smart guy. I have that handled, so I started to create our Office software, like the domain-driven way, or whatever, clean code fashion, whatever. And I promise you, this is no lie. The first thing I did was, we're going to get CSV files of our bank statements, and I'm going to parse them because that's all the incoming and outgoing money, and then we have to link that to receipts and invoices and stuff, and this is basically how we keep our records.
And the cool thing is, given that's a bank account, obviously this is something that could be considered like an event, because that's something that happened, it cannot be changed. It's not very likely that to include a mistake that we might have made, because, I mean, that's the bank giving us the data. So starting from there sounds like a very solid idea.
Yes, and this is now where the plan hits reality. This is actually what the bank gives us, and if you look closely, that's a genuine record. It's the very first booking that shows up on 1st of January 2013, which is a public holiday. That's kind of weird, but anyway. And the booking refers to 28th of December, but they don't specify the year there. To make parsing more interesting, because it's a different year, but with all the other records, like the 500 ones in that file, they don't specify the year, but they're the same year. So your parsing software doesn't really know in the first place what date to assume. And then they charge us 16 euros and 24 cents in fees, which because you have learned that you should represent monetary values by integers to avoid the float rounding difference issues. So I pretty much did that. I dropped the minus, and I assure you the minus doesn't change anything. I dropped the minus because to us it's an expense. So for us, it's in that context, it was a plus. And this is the result. You can actually verify that with your own computer in your favorite programming language. It's definitely a WTF, but it's not PHP specific.
The scary thing is that this is neither new or actually surprising, but when you write a parser and have that as this is what it boiled down to, but I think we found that problem at the total sum being 1 cent different.
Actually, I wrote the whole parser, and then I had a difference in 1 cent. And so I had started tracking that down, and the parser was even unit tested. And then I found that, that's a conversion problem. We leave it as an exercise to you to figure that one out. I tend to use that as an example ever since when it comes to maybe you want to Google for what every developer needs to know about floating point numbers. Okay, and that's my software written in 2012 and 13. And you may argue that it looks pretty clean. You may argue that there are a lot of interfaces that are implemented, which may be an indication that it's a big object, which may be a problem. But I'm not sure you can already spot the real problem. Let me show you the order. And the order essentially is derived from the bid. And going back, the invoice is derived from the order. Now, at that point, that totally makes sense to us because, we're going to write the bid or quote to the client. Some clients are going to order that quote, and that order then turns into an invoice. It's pretty logical. So we are passing around those objects, and they will get the data about the line items and whatnot. So we exactly know what we have to put on the invoice, and we're avoiding all the redundancy there ever was.
Sounds really awesome, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I was really proud of that until we realized that the tight coupling is a bit of a problem, because at some point a client awkwardly asked us to send them an invoice for whatever reason, and there was no quote. And there was no order, because there was no quote, obviously. So we had to start faking orders and quotes, because our system would require us to do so. That started feeling kind of bad.
But we ignored that and just kept on. Of course,
it's basically just a simple CRUD-style system, not anything of real special significance. Then, over time, we started running into very interesting business cases.
Yeah. Because we, at some point, decided that we are not necessarily going to fill out all the travel reports and send all the details to our clients, because that's just merely annoying for everybody, but create this is a fixed sum for traveling. And sometimes there's not enough in that fixed sum, because you have to buy a more expensive flight, or hotel nights turn out to be more expensive. And sometimes you make a little bit of a win. The problem, though, is that if you travel together, for example, say that we are going the same route, we could, of course, take 2 cabs, so just to make sure that everybody is going to have their receipts, or we can share one. But who's going to pay that? Is that his fixed sum or mine?
I publicly state hereby, I dearly love this gentleman, but I'm not going to pay for his taxi. So we had to figure out a way of splitting receipts. You also have to do that if you happen to have client A and client B in 1 week. And you fly a round trip, like flying out somewhere, then traveling on maybe by plane or some other means of transportation to somewhere else, and then flying back home, which makes perfect sense. Also from an ecological point of view, it saves time, it saves money. It only gets you into trouble if the client actually asks you for, okay, so can I see the receipt for the flight? And yeah, well, I have a flight that doesn't start where our company is based and it doesn't end where you are based. Basically, you don't really come up in that receipt, but we're going to charge you anyway. And it's most interesting question to figure out how to divide that.
Yeah, well, the first couple of 100 kilometers for that flight are going to be that customer. The next...
And we had that problem, and we felt that doesn't look nice. Then we ran into the big issue of one makes a reservation for 2 or 3 hotel rooms because we travel together. And again, I'm spending the money, so I need my company to refund me the money, but it has to be attributed to somebody else. So I paid money, which is cost that Arne incurs. And so we have to... Well, it got really weird. Pretty much the same with flight tickets, right? We already covered that. And you kind of end up with these kind of things. And as a consultant, if I get to see that, I'm going to say, whoa, that looks like it's complex.
The scary thing is that still didn't stop us from doing it.
And the weirdest thing ever we encountered was a multi-stop travel where you combine a client that pays for travel with a conference that does not pay for travel. Because then things get totally weird. So at the end of the day, our very small, simple software had to know these currencies, and we actually ran currency conversions, caching the results. We would invoice people in euro or US dollar, and well, sometimes even Canadian dollar, because if you can do multi-currency, then have fun with multi-currency. And the others is receipts that we had to deal with. Our software would know these countries, which is quite a list, and those are the entities that our software knew. Now, most of them look pretty familiar and normal. If you look at the remote time account, you get the idea that there was big trouble ahead. Now, usually you have a quote, and you go to work for the client, you return home, everybody's happy, you get money, you live happily ever after. At some point, client relationships started to build up. And clients actually would just send us an email or call us and say, hey, I have that urgent question. Can you please help me? Of course, there was no quote for that. Of course, there was no order for that. But, well, us being nice guys, we usually try to help out the clients. And sometimes the clients even expect us to send them a bill, which we couldn't. Because, well, we had to fake a quote. I'm faking a quote for remote time. Kind of doesn't really work out. So that's why we started to introduce those remote time accounts where we basically would keep track of remote time that we've worked for the clients and later decide whether we're actually going to bill them or not. But do you see that kills the whole idea of creating an invoice from a quote or an order? So essentially, it started going really bad when that happened. You remember?
Oh, yeah. That was a fun thing. And even though flowers might be actually really nice, it's really weird if you just find on your bank account somebody paying you for a bunch of flowers. Like, thank you for the flowers, 30 euros something.
Okay.
You're like, wait, what?
Of course, our software could not handle that, which basically, from a fiscal point of view, brought our company to a halt. So we said, well, maybe we can fix the problem by sending the money back. Which we did.
Didn't help though. It came back. They
paid for the flowers again 2 days later. It was some error in their whatever software thing. And then I think one of the weirdest things happened where one client got 2 invoices and they made 3 wire transfers that combined together would make up for the 2 invoices. And of course, our software could not handle that because our basic assumption was, well, we're going to invoice them, they're going to pay us. Now, if you get paid from Canada, they'll pay Canadian dollars, which the bank internally is going to convert to euros, and they're going to deduct a fee. So whatever money you receive is not the amount that you put on the invoice. So you have all kinds of really weird cases, which led us to do stuff like that, merging together various transactions to then assign them to receipts. And I think essentially it was a total mess. We were missing boundaries, failed again.
Yep. It's really scary that it took us way long to realize that we are violating basic rules of software development.
Yeah. So phase 4, we rewrote the software, and we rewrote the software in a decoupled fashion. Now everybody talks about coupling from a technology point of view. But now looking back, I realized that we were tightly coupled in our minds because our whole business was just that one thing. We are looking at it as a whole one thing without any clear boundaries and separations. That's why we built a monolith, even as a small company. Well,
it felt like it's one process that we are dealing with, completely ignoring it's actually not.
So now we have invoices that don't even know line items in a certain context, because it's just a total amount and a net amount, and the optional country, I don't actually know why we need that one, but anyway.
That's for the rendering, actually.
Okay.
To determine what language template to use.
Yeah. So this is the invoice that we use in the context of the software that helps us distribute the money. We don't even know about line items. This is how we build the invoice. Actually, we write a PHP script. Let's assume that we earn 42 euros. That's the net amount. Somebody is going to put that somewhere. I think Arne has created a live template in our IDE for that. So essentially, it's just entering those two numbers. And this PHP code allows us to then run our software. This is code that we use to render the whole thing. We're using LaTeX to render PDF, just in case you were interested. And you might think, well, it's kind of interesting, but this could only possibly ever happen to a small company if you think everything is so simple.
Well, turns out not really. There are large corporations doing really weird things, and one of our clients happened to
whatever.
Probably made one blank slide in between.
Okay.
One of our clients is, or was, depending on how you see it, they changed their business model a little, selling time of their employees, or they even get individual people to contract for them and then send to whatever kind of their customers. And that was really cool for them because it's a really easily scalable and very, well, efficient business model. Whatever amount of hours people work, you multiply that by an hourly rate that you're going to charge for those people, and that's the total that you're going to win. So that's easy.
So basically you work on timesheets, and this worked great. And they figured that basically we are going to invoice from the timesheet, which is exactly the same thing that we did at a smaller scale.
The cool thing is that this actually works relatively cool and is not necessarily problematic unless you try to have other people participate in the winnings. So saying that, let's say, the amount of hours that you created, what are you doing?
There should be an image coming up, which isn't. I'm seeing it here, and I'm seeing a blank screen there. Don't ever ask me why.
Okay.
Maybe you want to try?
I do believe you.
So imagine seeing an image of like a Swiss clockmaker putting in cogwheels into a thing, and it says, this costs 2,000 euros. Okay?
I'm going to try to fix that by moving the other screen over, if I find out where the mouse pointer is.
Yeah, that's the reason why you should not rely on presenter consoles to work. So, that's the image I was describing. It wasn't what you had in your mind, but anyway. So now you're building something that costs 2,000 euros, and that's exactly what that client started doing. It's project work, essentially. and let's assume that it takes somebody the whole week to build the thing, then the problem is that you end up with 2,025 euros based on these hours and the hourly rate. And that's not what your client expects you to bill them. So what they did was that, well, we are creating our invoices from the timesheets, so we're going to make the timesheets fit. And since they can't cheat on the time that people have worked, they just reduce the hourly rate. And yes, they did so going back half a year. And of course, everything else depended on that, like people's salaries, which would fluctuate, tax reports, which the tax office did not like.
Bonuses, all kinds of nice things.
And the funny thing is, it's exactly the same problem that we had at the small scale. Okay. So, it's like, you know, that's the waterfall. The idea of the waterfall always has been to stand up there on the edge and jump down. It's called going down the waterfall, and you're never ever gonna be seen again. And this gentleman is Kent Beck. You can clearly tell that he's afraid of the waterfall. Okay? He's one of the authors of Extreme Programming, dating back to the turn of the millennium, where one of the things he said is, well, development should be not waterfall and not that stuff that we always tried, but it should be coding, testing, listening, and designing. And he coined terms like Yagni. You ain't going to need it. Don't build software unless you need it. 2001, who has read the Agile Manifesto? Everybody needs to. Please go take that as a homework, read the Agile Manifesto. Essentially, one of the things the Agile Manifesto says, close daily cooperation between business people and developers. Well, it's kind of a problem if you are in your own business, you are the business people, and you still don't have a clue. Maybe that's just like in real life. Anyway, along came Domain-Driven Design, the book written by Eric Evans in 2003, where he basically says we need collaboration between technical and domain experts. So it's not about writing Jira tickets with solutions that we think we need. It's about discussing the problem between business people and developers.
And it's not about writing software either, at least not in the first place.
Yes. And all that, the most important concept that Evans gave us is the bounded context, which is exactly what we were missing out in our software, which we were missing out in our brain. Since it was our own company, we never really thought about it. And we figured that everything is just the same. We are basically going to create invoices because we have to. We never thought about the fact that we are, for one, creating invoices so that we get the money. Number two, for tax reasons, because we have to report those invoices to the tax office. Number three, we need some means to internally distribute money. Number four, we somehow have to keep track of our costs. It's completely different requirements. It's completely different contexts that we work on. And if you build software that spans multiple contexts, you are likely bound for trouble. Now, if you want to know what a bounded context is, we have a brilliant explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it's having like wires there, so that's kind of a bounded context in the middle, like of this thing. It's nice for fighting. It's a box fighting arena. So, of course, you need boxers, right? I mean, otherwise that's not boxing. So let's get boxers. Well, okay, maybe not this kind of boxer.
Yeah. Now you've learned all about bounded contexts. It's the same term has a completely different meaning in different contexts. And in a business, all that is close together, so it's really hard to make a clean distinction between which context are we in. And if you mix up those contexts, if they are blurry, then you end up with monoliths, just like we did back in 2013, 14-ish. I think we started to rewrite the software in phase 4. And if you've ever heard, as consultants, if you've ever heard us say, dear client, you built a monolith, and you shouldn't have done so. Let's talk about how you can avoid building more of a monolith in the future. We know what we are talking about. So, to conclude with, Eric Evans once said, domain-driven design is not for everybody. And I'm not sure I agree. I think what he means is domain-driven design is something that really needs a deep investment and involvement in working with the business and understanding the business. And it's not about writing software, that's just an artifact. It's about communication. I think that fundamentally should be part of every software development process. If it's not worth developing the software because there's stock software for that, well, then don't develop software, buy off-the-shelf software. But during the analysis phase, you still want to make sure that you understand what you need and what your software needs to do. So I don't think it's going to work out to decide early on, oh, that's just a simple problem, let's not apply domain-driven design to that, which we kind of did in phase 1 and phase 2. It's just a simple problem, it's just CRUD, it's just data entry. No, it's not. It starts small, but then it grows.
The funny thing is that if you use any type of stock software, chances are that you are faced with the option of not doing something because the software doesn't support it, or change your business so that it works with that software that you just picked. And we definitely realized we don't want to be in that situation because we wanted to do the business the way we wanted to do, as in sharing some of the cost, getting other stuff distributed, all those things. So after looking around a little bit, I mean, of course, we not decided directly to only buy software or not buy software because we are programmers and we might be able to actually write the software, but we didn't find anything that was supporting us in what we were actually trying to do. So that was our reason to start writing software ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And one of the main mistakes that basically had me spend, whenever I was traveling, I took out my laptop and worked on our software. We let the tax law basically invade our company. So we have, of course, a tax advisor who does the official book records keeping for us. And they do things quite differently than we had to do them. And initially, we wanted to have the numbers match because, we are developers. I want to see the numbers match because that's kind of my integration test. Yeah? If tax advisor gets to the same result than we do, then the things have to match. Great. And maybe at some point we can get even rid of the tax advisor. We actually thought about that for a while, thought, well, we might save some cost if we can do that. It turns out that you really can't comprehend tax law, and it changes every year. So I would assume that tax advisors might be able to comprehend that, but not regular people like us. So we kind of learned the very, very hard way that we have to give up on that. So technically, we have a bounded context, which is the tax law. And this bounded context is being represented by our tax advisor. And we don't care about all of that. Essentially, we sign some papers. We do actually read them before we sign them. There was never an order for a washing machine. I know that. But the rest of the numbers is like, yeah, kind of, if that's the amount of taxes that we have to pay, well, then so be it. We really don't understand that. And we honestly gave up on understanding that.
The only thing we actually check for is that whatever kind of final results he comes up with and what our software determines to be what we think is the real world. And if the numbers match up somehow, then we are kind of happy because that's close enough. Which actually, again, is the scaling factor because like this client that we just spoke about, they actually had the very same kind of issue that their internal software, how they managed all that stuff and the official reporting was not actually the same thing. And well, let's put it that way, the amount of money they are happy with, if they are close enough, is not what I would be very happy with. They make a lot more money and they ignore a lot bigger of a difference.
I remember being there one day when they were searching for $500,000 and that was even too much for their taste, so they were really nervous.
Yeah, but when they went down to like 100,000, they were like, well, that's not worth the effort of finding.
You don't want to know how they found the money. Basically, it all boils down to we changed some records in the database. Admittedly, that's not the software they run the tax reports of.
Likely not, because that's audited. That would be really weird if they could do that.
So there's at least two more observations that I'd like to share. Number one thing, why I have a love-hate relationship with Arne. He has an extraordinary good gut feeling. If you discuss anything technical with him and Arne's going to say like, it doesn't feel quite right, or I don't know if I'm convinced, you can be pretty sure that something's wrong that's going to fall on your feet at some point. And I've learned to trust that gut feeling. Then the hate part comes from Arne is exceptionally good at looking at stuff and saying, I don't think that's a real case, and if it is, I wouldn't want to solve that, so let's try to avoid the problem in the first place. So essentially what he did, whenever I was spending a lot of time thinking about, well, I was designing our business processes as I wrote the software literally, and I said, well, we need to figure out a way of splitting those receipts, and how do we do that, and how do we record that, and what does that affect? And I built all that, and then I was so proud and showed it to the guys saying, hey, look at what I've built. And then Arne looked and said, I don't think we want to solve that problem in the first place. Maybe we should avoid it. And then we had some discussions that ended us realizing that we don't want that feature. We don't want that software to exist in the first place. So, yeah, we removed it again.
I'm really sorry, though.
Yeah.
Still am.
Yeah, that's learning the hard way, right? So whenever we advise, think about the problem and understand the problem first before you build any solutions. I think we have very valid reasons to do that, because we have our own experience that it's really quite frustrating to build stuff only to realize that, well, it's so complicated, we don't want to be doing that in the first place.
And then removing it, and, well, removing all the side effects that had, well, yeah. What was that? Planning? Can you, hours of programming, can you save, like...
Weeks of programming can save hours of careful planning, yes.
Yeah, exactly. That was the way.
Yeah. Okay, so the message we want to leave you with. I think as an industry, we need to rethink software development. We cannot do software development the way we've always done it, because so many people have learned that that way does not work, or it does not work good enough. We need to rethink what we can change, and that's not about technology, it's about communication, it's about how development and the rest of the business interacts. I hate being with teams that talk about us and them. Well, they have requirements. And then if you ultimately get to the point, like the Arne point, I don't think you want to have this problem, and basically I think that that whole software module should not have been written, then somebody's going to say, yeah, but they required us to write that. And I think that's the wrong thinking. It should be us. We have decided. Another observation, there was a meeting with Arne and Sebastian, like you met, I think, for 2 days in Hamburg, designing parts of the software that we use now. And as part of that, like refining our process. So how should we do it in the first place? Basically, they spent the 2 days talking about the process. And then there was some software being developed subsequently. And I was not part of that meeting. And to this day, I do not fully understand what we are doing in that area and why we are doing that. I'm continuously still confused, and I really have a hard time understanding that just because I was not part of that meeting. So maybe that's an incentive to say, hey, let's really get together as a group initially and get clear on what the whole thing is about. What's the business about? Why are we doing that? And how should we do it best? And then get into a conversation how we can automate that.
The fun part was that we spent literally 2 days discussing, and on the first day in the morning figured like, okay, what are we going to do the 2 days? I mean, how hard can it be? So we discussed some things, and then like, okay, this is getting more complicated again. So let's scrap that and start over. And I think we spent like 3 or 4 iterations until we realized, okay, we're still trying to just rewrite the original software, and we're not trying to solve a problem that we are actually having. And by the time we realized that, then it suddenly became really easy because like, well, this is a simple problem. Let's handle the invoices. Don't care about anything else. Let's do that. And then do the other part. And wrote small pieces that ended up being, well, what we consider our controlling software, but it's still only tiny pieces that actually don't really know much about each other.
And whether you want to use a term or not, what we have learned to do, that's domain-driven design.
Yep.
Well, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, I think we have a few minutes, and we can take a few questions.